22nd at 6:04 p.m. Are there any motions to approve the agenda for this evening?
Motion to approve the agenda?
Okay, may I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor of approving the agenda for this evening, please say aye.
Aye.
The agenda for this meeting is approved, and I will turn it over to Dr. Furman.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. This evening we have two topics on the agenda. One is relating to budget, and it is a presentation prepared in collaboration between the high school and the finance office about the fees that the district has encumbered for paying for AP and IB testing. Ms. Lostrand is going to be the main facilitator of this presentation, so I'm going to pass it off to her. Welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for having me here, guys. Let's see, so right now, we have, the district pays for our IB and AP tests for all of our students. I'll go into more specifics, but this is the goal of what we're asking for and the rationale. So IB exam fees are $119 per exam or assessment. IB diploma, these are students who take 7 exams their senior year. They also have the 6 courses that have an extended essay or a reflective project for our Career Academy students. The Career Academy students, which are CP students, they take 2 exams their senior year and the reflective project. And AP exam fees are $96 per exam. So right now, we are the only high school that I know of that pays for all of these exams for all of their students. I worked at North Springs High School in Fulton County. We paid for the first AP test for students, and then families had to pay for the rest. This has been our current practice here for a very long time, since IB started. The diploma program students, their senior year, we're looking at $882 for those students who take all of those exams. For a career program student, that would be approximately $378. This is what the district has spent on these tests just over the past 4 years. As you can see, there are significantly more students in our IB program or diploma program taking those exams, which is absolutely fantastic. At the same time, it is also increasing our costs. So you'll see for AP tests, there were fewer, you'll see that FY22, it was a little bit less. Last year, the AP, the College Board had different rules for AP tests because they were only given virtually, so students didn't have to take them. That is changing this year. So this is our current process. Any student that is in an AP or an IB course, we automatically enroll them for their exam. We pay the registration fees in full. For 2020, the total cost that we're looking at is about $250,000 for these students. And I put how many students. Right now, this year, we're looking at about 250 diploma and career program students and about 620 students who take an AP exam, excuse me. If the student doesn't take the test, we don't get refunded that amount for that test. For AP, depending on when they pull out, we might not get charged for that. The point is, right now, all kids take the test because we pay for it, end of story. So these are some proposed changes that we would like to present to the board. For this year, absolutely no changes. We have that money budgeted. We continue to move forward with our plan. For next year's senior class, because these students have already completed 1 year of the IB program, and presenting this cost to families we feel would be an undue burden, we would like to offer the opportunity for students to choose if they do or don't want to take the test. If they choose, if they say they want to take the test, we will register them, pay for it, everything, okay? So it's an opt-out option, which we don't currently have because we pay for everyone, and so there's no choice. For class of 2024 and beyond, families would incur the cost of these tests with financial support available. It is absolutely essential that our families know that these fees should not dissuade them to participate in our program at all. We know that this is going to take a lot of education for our families, a lot of notice, a lot of just making sure they understand the steps for financial assistance, which I'll show you in a second. And we believe that this will take at least 2 years to be able to get that out to the community in order to plan accordingly. The group that worked on this, many of whom are at the back table, it was really important to us that we have an easy way for families to apply for assistance. It would be we would start sharing that with families immediately, letting them know that there will be support for them, and we will cover the cost or part of the cost depending on what the family's needs are. We do not have an application for assistance to present with you tonight, because we wouldn't need it for 2 years. So we want to do a lot of research on what other school systems do. We want to make sure that we are aligned with our equity pillar. We want to make sure that we are presenting this to families in a fair and equitable way as well. Budget every year, approximately $50,000 in order to support our families who might need this financial assistance. So some financial implications, no change to this year's budget. There will be some cost savings next year if we do the opt-out option. We don't think it will be hugely significant, maybe around $15,000, but maybe not even that much. And then the following year, we would just ask for $50,000 to be in the budget to cover the financial assistance. Any questions?
So for next year, thank you first for the presentation.
Sure,
I
yeah.
appreciate you all putting to it. For next year, for 2023, when you ask the parents and or kids if they would like to opt in to take the test, at that point, will there be maybe an option for them to pay as well at that point to help with costs?
So we did not feel, we can add that if that is something that the board thinks we can add. We just didn't feel it was fair to put the burden of some of these things on parents with a very short notice. For some families, it could be, like I said, almost $1,000 for the senior year. So anytime I ask the community for money, be it donations for something, everyone always gives above and beyond, and I'm always able to cover whatever someone in the community needs. So if we put it out there for families, like we're rolling this out over the next 2 years, is there some options for next year? I anticipate that there will be families who will say, absolutely, I'll go ahead and pay for my exam. Even though the majority of these are senior year, sophomore year kids, a lot of kids take AP US History, and then there's AP Statistics and AP Calculus. Those are the other AP classes that we have that a lot of students take that aren't necessarily their senior year. I actually heard from a friend in another district, a parent who texted me today and said, FYI, my son just came home and asked me for $100 for their AP exam. And I'm like, oh, really? It's February. Okay. So we're really hoping that if we get the okay and we move forward with this, that we know the importance of making sure families understand that. Yeah.
So would you have the opt-out or the opt-in, however you want to look at it, option for every class going forward? I know that for some colleges, there's caps on credit they can take.
Right.
They can only HLs or something like that.
So starting next year, moving forward, yes.
So every class would have the option to just take 3 if it's 6.
Correct. And there are some students who might have, we also have, if they decide not to take the exam, they would have to reimburse us. So, for example, I got into Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech will only accept this certain grade on the exam. I'm 90% sure I'm not going to get that. I'm gonna go ahead and opt out of that. I'm gonna pay $119, and I just don't even want to sit for the test. That's also an option.
Other schools that have an IB diploma like this, or how to, kind of how they structure their spring semester, and 'cause I know a lot of their prep work is for these.
My team and I talk about that. Some classes already, preparing for the exam is part of the instruction that happens. For some classes, it's more preparing for an exam and less about what's going on in the classroom. So that will be the work that me and my instructional team will have to do to make sure that that work is meaningful and instructional, aligned with the course, so that if the kids decide not to take the test, they're not sitting there for 3 weeks twiddling their thumbs.
Well, I have a question about that. So let's say you're teaching one of these detail IB classes, and about 50% of the kids decide in that class they're not going to take the test. Is there another final exam that these students would take because they're not taking the IB exam?
So that would be something that the team and I would work on. Also realize, though, for some of these kids, they can't get the diploma if they're not sitting for the exam.
Right.
So for the majority of students in the diploma program, it's not an option not to take the test because they want the diploma. This is more for those students who, the opt-out are more for the AP kids or for the kids who are not going for the full diploma. They're sitting in the class for the content of the class and for the class credit.
One more question. Do we currently, and I should know this, I know for end of course exams, we take those grades and they calculate into the student's final grade, but
Correct.
do AP exams and the IB diploma grades, do those calculate into the student's overall grade?
Nope. In fact, we don't even get them until later in the summer. So for the IB kids, we don't know how they do on their exams until July, August. For AP, if they take them their sophomore year, we get the scores back, but they're already out of the class. So those exams don't factor in to the grade they get in the class. It also does not factor in to whether the class is weighted. AP and IB classes, they have an additional weight to them in the student's GPA because they are higher level courses. The exam is irrelevant to them getting the credit for the class and getting the extra bump on their GPA.
So, I want to revisit, or I want to have a conversation quickly about not doing this within this budget, right? Because, as long as we can be very comfortable that any family that needs the financial assistance has it, right? Because that's the baseline. As long as anybody that needs it has it, what we're talking about then is the families that don't need the financial assistance still getting the benefit from the school.
Mm-hmm.
And I know with where we are in the budget this year, that $200,000, we're talking about $200,000, right? That's $0.10 That impact on taxes is a couple $100 for everybody within the community. It's 2 teacher positions. So I'm kind of uncomfortable with that. I mean, we're in a situation where we are talking about that kind of severity of cuts and that kind of severity of tax implications. For us to say that it's not time to talk to the parents now so that we're ready within this budget.
Right.
To actually make these changes. I would encourage us to revisit that. Again, and that is completely predicated upon the assumption that we are providing the resources for the families that need it. We are really only talking about the families that don't.
100%. Problem is, this bill has already been paid.
But I'm talking about 23, the budget we're building right now.
Got you.
Yeah, so
Okay.
fiscal year 23's budget is being built now, and I would prefer us to have an option to view billing it with this included as opposed to not having it included. And I fully understand that in saying that, there's more work that's going on your plate. So, I mean, forgive me, but.
It's not that. The IB diploma program is a 2-year program. So for 22, 23, these families and students have committed to this program, and we felt like asking them out of the gate, like, hey, you're already in the program. If you want the diploma, this is what you're going to have to pay. We didn't feel like that was the best thing for our families. I understand that you guys have a different lens that you're looking at this. So we can definitely word things, give people the option to pay. We can do that kind of advertising, next year. I just don't know what that would look like financially, how many people would choose that option.
I mean, they still have the option to not pay for it if they choose to
Correct.
pay for it, right?
Correct.
So I guess what we're not telling them is they must pay for it.
Correct.
We are simply saying that if they are gonna go through with the degree program, we've had to make some changes just given the nature of where we are. Again, 2 teacher positions, a tenth of a mil tax increase to offset that, for a benefit that they would get nowhere else, anywhere so far as you know in the entire state of Georgia. I'm going to strongly encourage that we look at what it would take to put it on the table for this budget that we're building now. Understand on fiscal year 22, no issue with that. But for 23, I'm uncomfortable pushing it out a year. We have an issue right now with this budget. And again, we're basically saying, is it worth asking parents who can afford it? Is it worth having to say goodbye to 2 teacher positions or put a 10% tax increase or a 10 mil increase on people
Absolutely.
in order to cover it? I'm not sure that's the trade-off I would make.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. I think we were looking more conservatively at the plan out of the gate, because we were looking at it from a family point of view, but I think those are excellent points, and we can definitely put that into the information that we share with families for next year.
I personally feel there's some willingness for the community. If I'm a parent at this, I am a parent, although my kids are here. But that messaging I would respond to.
Okay.
Right? That is something that I would take into consideration.
I would agree with that too, and I really appreciate you and, the team that worked on this, considering, being fair to the parents that did not, anticipate having to incur this cost, when their, children, started the program. But I think it will be like on some field trips where, parents, contribute, even though that they don't have to, and, so many families are very fortunate in the district to be able to do that. I think wording it in a way that we strongly encourage folks who are able to do that, because we're having to make some, tough budget decisions. I think, it's valid.
I also think, Jana, that people, if they know what we're asking money for, they're more likely to say yes, right? Like, if we say, it's for this thing, they're like, okay, I'll go ahead and move forward, and we can have different payment plans for folks. So there are a lot of options that we can put on the table for next year to offer families.
From a parent who has a child in this exact situation, where, I would definitely think second year, especially with that type of wording.
We will take that into consideration as we plan the budget for FY '23. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate that. Okay, well, I'm going to introduce our next team. Are you going to go first, Dr. Beam? Yes. Okay. So Dr. Beam and Dr. Huddleston's team have collaborated to give the board a mid-year update on kind of where we are with all of our district improvement plan work. And embedded in this will be an update on we are in progression with reviewing our social studies curriculum, as well as what supports are in place for mental health across the district. So even though it is a general update, we have specifically pulled out and identified those 2 areas because we see those were of interest to the board. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Beam to get us started.
Yes, well, thank you. All right, so as you are definitely familiar with our framework for equitable outcomes, which includes our 3 pillars of advancing racial equity, accelerating student learning, and building and sustaining a positive culture and climate. And so we will be reporting out on that tonight. We have shared with you some guiding questions and a note catcher if you would like to jot some notes down during the presentation about what do you notice, what do you wonder, what surprises you, and as we look at our data, our mid-year data, what does the data suggest?
So, and what you have are, we didn't give you copies of the actual presentations, but you have their report. And their presentations are just gonna be a highlight of what's in the report, as well as the data. So you'll have 2 reports and then some attached data for that one, and then the note catcher for you to take notes as you go.
Do they have a, electronic copy of the reports as well?
Not yet.
Okay, well, let's share those with you, because I did include links in the report. Okay, so for my pillar, that my department, not my pillar, but the pillar that my department is responsible for, accelerating student learning. We did, you may remember, have created some district priority initiatives that we plan to achieve in the next 5 years. And that is that we are committed to accelerating student learning by focusing on effective teaching and learning practices that align with our instructional framework. 5 years, our 5-year long-term goals are that by 2026, we will eliminate the disproportionate outcomes that are predicted by race. All of our students will meet or exceed their growth scores, and then our students will exemplify the graduate profile. So the instructional core of our instructional framework is our students, our standards, and our teachers. And we know, looking at our data, that we have got to focus on our standards. By focusing on our standards, we know that we can identify that if we purposefully and relentlessly focus on that instructional core, that we can change the predictive power, the predictive power of the demographics in regards to student achievement. We need to focus purposefully on our state standards through the lens of our IB and our EL framework, and provide our students with those tools of power so that they can be academically successful and ready for college and career when they leave CSD. So this is our mid-year achievement data, and what we are seeing here is the percent of students at or above grade level in mathematics, broken out by race, from kindergarten through 8th grade. This is our MAP data based on growth this is their mid-year achievement that was taken in December. So these are students that are at or above proficiency.
Clear, this is what you're saying, these bars are gonna equal one another by 2026.
Yep.
So it would be great to know what they're gonna do next year, the year after, and the year after that as well, so we can track it as we go along.
And the 5-year plan that is in the framework for equitable outcomes. So our district improvement plan is provided. And so we have been working on the mid-year review to see where we are with everything, what we need to adjust as we go into as we are planning for next year now.
When did we start this process? When did we put this in place?
This is 2021. This is our 5-year plan.
So this is a year or so in so far, I guess, is my question?
We're half a year, so, well,
Wait, 21 or 22, yeah.
so it's so there's like COVID kind of interrupted our progress on this.
Sure.
So we had launched our framework for equitable outcomes for students the year COVID started. So with that fall,
It's delayed us, basically.
it delayed us, kind of paused things. So this framework was launched. So then what we've been doing over the summer is they looked at their 5-year plans, made adjustments. So now we're really back on track with collecting data. We didn't have good administration of MAP last year either because some kids were virtual, some were in school. So we really took this summer to do a deep dive into what our current plan is, what the 5-year goals and what the 5-year activities were. And then we're halfway through the first year, so reporting out on where we are data-wise and steps within the. You can kind of think of this as a baseline here. And so here is the data in reading, broken out in the same fashion. So where we have some areas to celebrate is in our growth data. So when we look at our student growth, you can see that about 50% of our students district-wide are meeting or exceeding their growth targets. You can see that there was an increase in 2021, and NWEA does say that that is the baseline. If you are meeting the 50%, then you are doing
well. I don't feel that way, so there is really, our growth target, the student's growth target is based on a comparison of like students. Every student with intentional instruction based on standards can meet that growth target. And we currently, like I said, do have reason to celebrate. We have classrooms throughout the district that are 80, 90, and we have one teacher, 100% of her students are meeting their growth target. So it is achievable. It's not easy. It takes intentional, examination of the data, intentional teaching of the standards, using high-quality resources, but we can do it. We just, with us all working together.
But I think it's also worth pointing out on this slide, just so it's not missed, is that even the impact of COVID, it looks like actually being able to, so that I would call that good news.
Yeah. Yes, and so the one thing I do want to point out about the growth, when we talk about accelerating student learning, when we look at the growth compared to our achievement, we know that we can see that what is happening as our Black students are with us, that achievement is declining, and even if they, if a student starts out below grade level and doesn't meet that growth target, then they are going to have a bigger gap the following year. So the only way we can close that gap is to increase that growth. So the students that are below grade level need to achieve more than a year's growth. So when we talk about accelerating that student learning, we have really got to intervene to ensure that they are really getting up to grade level, and that's why we are focused so diligently on the K-2s to make sure that those gaps don't get bigger, and so that we are setting students up with a strong foundation, especially in reading and the conceptual understanding of mathematics. So this is our math growth for this year, and this is our reading growth for this year. Now, I would like to point out something. We saw that in achievement, we did see higher levels of achievement. So if we look at, for example, our kindergartners coming in at 75% readiness.
But this one is not as good news, right? This is, we're looking at.
Right. What we saw when we looked at the quadrant, it was interesting that the majority of our Black students were in the high achievement, low growth in reading, which was the opposite than it was in math, where it was low achievement, high growth. And so where we want all of our students is to be high achievement, high growth. And so that's what we're working on with the quadrant. Again, it's not a huge discrepancy as far as the growth, but what we need to see is that red line above the green line so we can close those gaps that we're seeing in achievement. Okay, so in order to meet our goals, we have focused on 5 priority initiatives to achieve this vision of the high quality, rigorous education for all of our students. At the core of the initiative are standards aligned, grade appropriate, culturally relevant collection of curricular materials that CSE will provide educators at all grade levels and subjects to be able to utilize to ensure that our students meet their goals. When teachers lack resources that they need, they head online to supplement and piece together curriculum. But the uneven quality of online resources and the disconnect between online resources and the educational standards can contribute to the inequities in access and performance that we see across the district. And so studies have shown that improving the quality of curriculum is about 40 times more cost-effective than class size reduction. So additionally, without the access to high-quality curriculum, teachers end up spending about 7 to 12 hours a week searching for teaching materials. And that takes time away from the time they're spending on how they're going to deliver that instruction to differentiate for their students. This is also confirmed by our teacher exit interviews here in CSD, and thus that's a factor that both contributes to student achievement and teacher retention. So reducing the variability of these resources means that students in every classroom across the district will have access to high-level, vetted, research-based material and resources. And while the schools and educators will of course have the autonomy to implement their own lessons, this initiative will ensure that our schools are guaranteeing access to the high-quality, culturally responsive curriculum that's the basis of the instruction.
How do we measure that? How do we determine that we are actually successful at doing that?
So we measure it obviously by student achievement, by student growth, and then also, which we have broken down by classroom so that our principals have that data so they can, you know, what we want to do. One of our goals in the district improvement plan is identifying teachers that are successful with all of our students, these teachers that are really making these high gains. And so we want to see what are they doing that may be different from other classrooms so that we can build on those skills and build on our strengths. So we measure it through achievement and growth. We also measure it through walkthrough data. We have a CSD walkthrough tool, and then of course the state of Georgia teacher, you know, evaluation system. And through that, we can see if these highly effective, these high leverage practices are being implemented in the classroom. So are students goal setting? Are the learning targets accessible to the students? Do the students understand what they are supposed to be learning? Is it being measured? Are the teachers assessing and adjusting instruction based on what their interactions with the teachers?
And the walkthrough tool also presumably it's sort of like a mini audit, I guess, of the classroom, or where you're actually looking at materials that are in the classroom, making sure that the teacher isn't bringing in unapproved curricula. Is that what you're just? I'm trying to understand exactly what you mean when you're talking about measuring that the teacher is teaching according to the curriculum that we're putting forward.
So yes, the walkthrough tool does look at, you know, what is being taught. The lesson plans are where I think where you would see what the materials are.
Okay.
And no, we don't. I mean, we don't tell teachers they can't bring in supplemental materials.
Okay.
What the goal of my department is to provide them with those high quality materials so they don't have to go out and find supplemental materials. Of course, they are welcome to, you know, bring in relevant things, but, you know, that's where it is the lesson standards align, and that's going to come in. You know, if we're providing them with good quality materials, they're not going to have to go out and find those.
Okay.
Dr. Ben, what are some examples of some high-quality curriculum or resources that you all have this school year?
Yeah, so this school year, so, you know, historically, or at least over the last few years, Decatur has had a very school-specific model. So schools and teachers have had the autonomy to select what materials they want, which sounds lovely, except for, as we're talking about, that can lead to inequities, that can lead to teachers having to spend all of their time looking for things. So we have adopted this year, we have started implementing the American Reading Company core curriculum at K-5. That is in all of our K-5 classrooms, and that is a complete package that has all of our classroom libraries have been replaced, and we have gotten some good feedback on that. We are, one of the reasons that American Reading Company was selected was through the NYU Culturally Responsive Scorecard is one of the tools that we use to select our curriculum. Through that process, and what it asks is things such as, who are you seeing in the literature? Are we seeing students of color? Are we seeing women in non-stereotypical roles? Are we seeing, you know, who is the author? Are we only seeing authors that are white men, or are we seeing different perspectives? So that was a tool that was used. So one of the reasons that they were selected, or one of the primary reasons they were selected, is they have a strong equity statement that matches our goals and values. Another reason is the level of rigor that they introduce in the classroom, and so that's very important. So also it aligns with our IB and EL framework because it is an inquiry-based unit of study. So we adopted 2 units this year, and next year we will add the other 2 units. So every K-5 classroom, we are supporting implementation of the American Reading Company curriculum. In addition to that, it has an assessment that goes along with it called the IRLA, the Independent Reading Level Assessment, and that is an ongoing assessment. Teachers are required to report it out 3 times a year, but we can go in and we have a database where teachers are conferencing. The expectation for most students is every 2 weeks. So in their small group reading instruction, they are constantly doing formative assessments with students. The really nice thing about the IRLA, as opposed to other assessments that we have used previously, is it also gives teachers the next steps and the next moves that they can make with those students based on the test results. So in their small group, they might be working on blends, whereas this group might need to be working on phonemic awareness or, you know, what have you. And so there's different steps that might need to be taken with different students. So it provides those teachers with the resources, with the steps. So again, it's very strategic and intentional with how they're working with the students. Another resource that we've provided to all teachers is in K through 3 is Foundation, which is a structured phonics. It's based on Orton Gillingham multisensory instruction. And so every classroom in grades K through 3 is implementing 30 minutes a day of structured phonics. And so the way that those two fit together is we have the whole group structured phonics, and then the IRLA gives teachers the next steps to work with, you know, differentiate for students in small groups. So those are 2 of them. We've also going into, well, this year, we have provided all teachers with training on Georgia Numeracy Project, which isn't, it's not necessarily a resource, but it provides the resources, and it's also an assessment that tells you the level, but it's very different than most math assessments because it's a conversation with the child. So you understand, you get a glimpse into the child's conceptual understanding, and then again, it kind of tells you the next move to make to allow for differentiation.
And we're tracking the teachers that are actually implementing or using these. Is there a way to get some sort of percentage readout on how many are, or, I mean, presumably we want to get to a point where everybody is doing it, right?
Yeah, so we track we can see when a teacher enters IRLA data into the system, so we know how often they have met with the students, and so we can see the students' growth on an ongoing basis. And so we are working on that. I know some schools, not all teachers are used to having it on the computer. I don't know, elementary teachers, but the old running records, you usually keep them in your, so getting it into the computer has been a report or something that the schools have reported that they're like, we swear we're doing it, but it's not always getting in there. So we are really working with the schools that it's really important that we keep this data in here and that it's current and updated. So,
and this is an implementation year for that. Like you said, we're only doing half of the units that they've provided so that our teachers can learn the process, understand what the materials are. And this is part of the outcome of our program evaluation. So they did the program evaluation. Last year, they adopted a curriculum. They piloted it in some schools. This year is half, like the beginning implementation. Next year's full implementation. And then as we go through the program evaluation process, we adopt new curriculum and resources to support what the needs are identified from the program evaluation process.
And the source of my questions, again, I'm not an expert on curriculum, so I'm not going to be able to get into the weeds on that. But from just an accountability standpoint, as we're talking about implementation and rolling something out, it would be good to know how successful have we been? Is it at 30% of the classrooms, or is it at 50%? Are we wanted to be in 80%, but we only got to 65? Like, I mean, that's where I'm talking about, like, how do we look and are we successful as we're doing it?
yeah, so it is being implemented in every classroom. It's the level of fidelity with which it's being implemented that we're working on. So the way that we measure that is, one, which teachers do we see that the students have the data? And so we check that regularly, and we let the schools know, like, hey, you know, your teachers, 80% of your teachers have entered data in the last 2 weeks or what have you. And so we send those reports out. We also work with the American Reading Company consultants who come in once a month, and they do job embedded in the classroom training with our teachers. So we are always visiting the classrooms, and we have a little walkthrough tool, and we say, what do we see? Do we see it? I just go in and I'm like, check, check, check. No, I'm not seeing it. You know what? We need to do a better job of supporting with implementation of this or whatever we see. If I see teachers saying, like I said, you know what, I'm doing it, but I just don't have time to enter it in the computer. Well, there's ways you can do it at the same time, but maybe they're not comfortable with that. So that's something we are working on and supporting with. From the implementation, we know that we need to increase the coaches, that's what they're called, the consultants, the coaches being in the building and in the classroom.
Let me maybe if I could ask it this way, because I appreciate the level of detail that you're going into and the level of work, and I think that it's not really our job to get into that level of detail, right, with you? Like, that's not, we're not trying to day-to-day check it. I guess I would ask, the answer doesn't have to come here, but if you guys were to step back and say, what is the right thing for the board to look at on a monthly basis tracking this? What is the right level of information for them to get, to be able to say, we're on track, we're not on track, we need to pay attention, whatever that may be. I'm just looking for what that may be. Again, I don't want to put anybody on the spot and try to answer that right now, but I would be interested in understanding what you guys think that should be so that we can begin tracking.
I would actually say like a quarterly update would probably be a little
Yeah,
more better than
that's
a monthly
reasonable.
update, but yeah, that is something as her department is implementing and taking this, initial pilot off the ground and something that they're gathering the data on. I don't know that they've put it in a formal presentation for us, but it is something they.
So the company has actually started providing us with, they're called insight reports, and so they break them down by demographics on a monthly basis and send them to us as far as the student growth in reading on the IRLA. Again, if the data is not input, we're not getting accurate data. So we're working on making sure the data is input, and they're providing those reports, so I can certainly provide those to you as well as the schools. So we believe in a collaborative model, and so as such, we've enlisted teacher leaders and coaches and school leaders to work with us on developing common pacing, units, and assessments across the district. The district math team continues to meet once a month, as we've done 2 years now, and we are moving forward with recommendations on the CSB Math Action Plan. This year, we've reviewed the K-5 curriculum materials, examined data, and policies around math acceleration, and we're working on professional learning plan that focuses on differentiation. Additionally, we've worked with coaches and teacher leaders to create common pacing guides for K-5, and parallel to the math work, we are working diligently with the schools on implementation of our common pacing guides in ELA, in conjunction with the implementation of ARC and Foundations that I have already mentioned. In world languages, we are in a review cycle as well, and so 612 have worked together for several years to create consistency across the program, so that Spanish 1, whether it's at Renfro or Spanish 1 at DHS, is a consistent course. We only offer, obviously, Spanish K-12, so we are really focused in on that more mature program of the Spanish evaluation this year, rather than our French and German and Latin programs that we also have, but we are doing that review, that deep dive into K-12 Spanish this year. We have also started working with our PE music and media specialists, and those teachers are working collaboratively for the first time in recent memory. They are having K-12 alignment meetings, and we've created time and space for them to create grade level expectations, benchmarks at each grade level, review common resources for each school, and create a more cohesive program for our students across the district. Okay. So these are some of the things that we have implemented this year. Our math and ELA teachers are collaborating consistently throughout the year, creating common pacing guides. Our K2, it's been such a great experience to work with them and bring those coaches together and bring those leaders together and see the collaborative work that's coming out of that. And this year we've worked on, again, those standards-based tasks, those resources, providing those for our schools. At the secondary level, teachers continue to use collaborative planning time to create common pacing guides and identify common standards-aligned resources. And I think I've already mentioned the instructional resources, but the ARC curriculum, the foundations, the district math and reading pacing guides, the units of inquiry, of course, with RIB and our expeditions would be.
For the Tier 2 and Tier 3 monitoring, I remember that from being REP teacher, the platform for progress monitoring and different tools being created in addition to Infinite Campus and things like that. And so what are you all considering as a common platform? I know that could be a source of frustration sometimes for teachers.
Absolutely, and it has been definitely a challenge for us on the district level to monitor that because schools are using different tools, and not all of the tools even have a consistent digital platform. So we have found that really in order to deeply monitor that, we have to go into each independent campus, into each student's plan, pull up the plan, and look at the data within the plan. So you're talking about hundreds of students and having to go into PDFs, and that is just not at all efficient or effective. And so we definitely want to have that common platform. Many of our schools are now using Ames Web. At Renfro, they're using Read 180 and STAR as our progress monitoring tools. And so what we are looking at now, we've been exploring, we've been meeting as a collaborative team up here with Dr. Huddleston's team and Ms. Holt's team. And there's a new platform out by the state that we're looking at. They've had Go IET for a while with our students with individual education plans, but now we are looking at, they have a Go MTSS. And so we are about to review that platform. So it may be that one, but we will have a decision. The plan is by April 1st. You know, we've been getting feedback from our EIP and our REP teachers this year, you know, what's working and what's not, and what is the best tool to use, so that next year we will have a common online platform so that we can help, you know, monitor and see the student growth as well. And then the important piece to that is students that aren't seeing the growth that we would expect to see in those interventions, how can we help to shore that up, or do we need to provide more support so that we don't have students going, you know, 12 weeks, 6 months without seeing the growth that we would anticipate. But this year we did provide all the schools with a simplified assessment plan because that universal screening is very important so that we are identifying students that need additional support or enrichment right away. To maximize interventions, we added the 11 new intervention teachers across the district, and that's to address any gaps that we are seeing and allow for more consistent ratios across the district. MAP testing is being consistently implemented, and it was well over over 95% of students at K-8 did take the fall and winter MAP. And so we also purchased some special reports, which the coaches and principals reported were very beneficial. I found them very beneficial to get that better analysis and be able to use that data, because that's the important part, is to be able to adjust our instruction based on what we're seeing. The MTSS team has reviewed, as I mentioned, and audited all of the academic intervention plans and determined the student progress towards grade level performance. They hold regular meetings with the MTSS leads at each school to review school data, determine next steps, and problem solve areas of improvement. We've implemented extended day tutoring, intervention, Saturday school program, and established or expanded K-12 extended day tutoring to support all of our students to reach grade level proficiency. And we continue to take part as one of 6 districts throughout the state of Georgia in the Georgia that is coming out of Senate Bill 48 that will go into effect in 2024, and requiring that all districts assess and identify characteristics of dyslexia and provide those interventions. In the work we've accomplished so far, we have created a systematic plan for screening all students in grades K through 3 to identify characteristics of dyslexia. The pilot requires that we provide interventions for students and that are identified with those characteristics. One of our district priorities is to create that guaranteed and viable curriculum for all students, so we've already gone beyond the requirements of 2024. We are in our 2nd year of implementing the requirements, and we have made the conscious decision to screen all students. The law only requires we screen students that may have, that we've identified as a need for intervention, but we have taken the next step to screen all of our students. That provides us with the explicit instruction, or we can provide all of our students with the explicit instruction of structured phonics. We have trained all of our K-3 teachers in Wilson's Foundation. And in addition to that, we have had a number of teachers that have gone through the 70-hour OG certification. They have taken 2 weeks of their summer full-time. We have a cohort of teachers that are now coming on Saturdays to do that training. So that has just been awesome. And so, you know, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach for students, and so we want to be sure that we have that strong Tier 1 approach, but that we're also layering on those interventions. We also have a group of teachers that are doing the Science of Reading Through Letters program, including myself. All right, and so then to embed the practices in every classroom, as I mentioned, that NYU culturally responsive curriculum scorecard is definitely one of the foundations that we use. And that really did, once we narrowed the curriculum down to, that really made the difference, because when we looked at the two, we could really see American Reading Company, those different perspectives. We could see those non-stereotypical depictions of people and just, you know, the things that we wanted to see. Also things, the way that they approach things as far as the, for example, teaching setting. It's not just about time and place. They talked in first grade about social setting and cultural setting. So we're just, you know, trying to embed those values in all of our classrooms. And then in collaboration with Dr. Banks and our equity department, we have done an informal review of our social studies resources, and we are providing students, our teachers, with an accurate and appropriate list of resources to be used, as well as deeper training. We worked with our 8th grade teachers last year, and we are going to do some more work with our 7th grade teachers this summer.
Is there a particular program or some rubric that we're following to sort that piece out?
So we developed an internal plan. We're not in a program review for social studies, but because there was a need based on some things that we had seen and heard, that we developed an informal process. And what we did was we asked the schools for, what are your primary resources? What are you using to teach social studies? And then we have put them together in a list, and we're kind of in the final stages right now where we are going to ask our, we've done an internal review, and we're going to ask our, we're going to put it back to our SLTs and ask them to provide us some people to take a more of an outside non-educational lens and see if they see things that are problematic, or if.
What would it take to put social studies into a program review?
We would need to prioritize that or have more people to do that. I mean, it's quite time consuming, you know, to dig through the curriculum and to vet the curriculum and to create the pacing guides. And
so that's not a criticism of the work that's been done. I think it's obviously a reasonable first step to do an informal review, but I would be, I mean, I'm one person on the board, right? But I would be interested in understanding the budget impact for doing a formal, proper program review of social studies, and have that as an option for us to trade off on other budget priorities.
Question, does the formal review come when it's up for evaluation?
yeah,
And so, and that happens when for social studies?
I believe it's not this coming up school year, but the next year is the collect and study year, and then the following year it's a 3-year cycle. Let me see. I think it is. So here is our cycle that we use.
And I think what would be helpful too to hear from, particularly since you've raised this question a couple of times, is what are your specific concerns about our current social studies content, resources? We have to follow the state curriculum. That's a non-negotiable. So it's with the resources that we're using to teach that. And I think, you know, the informal process has really helped us identify what resources we're using, has given us some supportive resources. And I think debunking the process would create a pretty big disruption to what we currently have in the works for our math review, which is in process right now. So it would either put the brakes on that and stop that process, or we'd have to hire additional staff to move forward on that process.
My suggestion is not to blow up what we're already doing, right? So I want to be clear on that. This is something that I think is probably incremental, if we were to do both and, not either or. I mean, I think it's probably best said by what Dr. Ream just said, that we have obviously noticed enough of an issue that we actually began our own informal review. And if that is the case, why would we not, I mean, it is, again, not speaking as someone that's an expert on curriculum, but it feels to me fairly straightforward that decolonizing something like math is a little bit more straightforward than grappling with the ramifications of how history has historically been taught, especially in light of all the bills that we see going forward, right? And so I would want very much to be in front of that rather than behind that, and prevented from doing something like that in 3 years as opposed to having the free rein to do it next year. I'd rather us accelerate the social studies, and that's what I'm asking, is what would that take? Now, if it's $42 million, and, you know, obviously that's gonna be great, but I personally would like to be able to vet that against other budget priorities.
Let's take a different, I was just wondering if Dr. Beam had, found when we would be reevaluating the social studies curriculum.
Yeah, so we are on, so we have a 3-year or a 3 to 5 year cycle where we collect and study, we plan, then we implement, and we're in implement and monitor for 3 years. So right now we've wrapped up the K-5 ELA, and we are in the implement and monitor for K-5 ELA. This year we are in the collect and study process for K-12 world language and ELA 612, and then the plan for math. And then next year it's supposed to be science, career tech, and instructional frameworks. And, you know, we've started that a little bit with the presentation that you just saw. And so then the following year, 23-24, is where social studies.
No, that's okay. I'm just gonna take a different spin on this question, because I think I understand what he's trying to ask here, but he started this presentation out looking specifically at the metric of race and how there's a huge performance gap between a Black child and their white counterpart.
Yep.
And by the time they get to Renfro, that gap is huge.
Yep.
And when we get those school principal reports, you can see that it's across every school, so every school, every elementary school. And I think these are all great ideas. It sounds like the variable or the factor we're looking at is how does the element of race disparity, which has been an issue for Decatur for years, decades. So if we don't quite know what the problem is and we can't quite figure out what the variable is that we want to correct for, then we're not going, it's going to continue to persist. And I find that every time I see that data, I get a little nauseated.
Mm-hmm.
And what I don't understand is how these practices are going to look at that factor specifically. And maybe it's not, because again, I'm not a curriculum expert, but I think all of these things will raise the bar for the entire district. Every child will benefit from culturally responsive curricula, books that don't have stereotypes, books by Black authors. But what is your theory or your hypothesis about why this continues, especially in math? By the time kids get to upper elementary and middle school, that math data is just striking. And if we don't know, we need to say we don't know, because that's where we need to go back and start, is why does this persist? Because all of these things seem like they would benefit every child, Black, white, Asian, multiracial. But we've got a problem here with our Black children underperforming their white counterparts, whether they are, no matter where they go to school, no matter where they live, no matter what their socioeconomic status is. That to me is the most striking, and that's where I'm getting lost here.
So I believe it's because we have lost our intentional focus on teaching state standards. I think we focus in very high-level practices related to our frameworks, but we need to get back to focusing intentionally on our standards and what our data is telling us. And so if you think about the students that are going to, who are going to be most impacted by a lack of intentional standards being taught in the classroom, it's going to be students that might be from immigrant families or students that may not learn those standards at home. If you are traveling, if you are, providing rich experiences for your students in the home, as many of our affluent families, those Black and white, do, then our students are going to achieve at higher levels. But if not, then that is where our classroom instruction must serve all of our students.
And that's why she started with talking about the instructional core and really leaning in to focus on our instructional core. Because as Dr. Beam just shared, there is no alignment of teaching the standards consistently and pervasively across the district. Some teachers do, some teachers don't. Some teachers pull in aligned materials, some teachers don't. Some teachers assess regularly and give feedback, and some teachers don't. So creating this intentional, really aligned focus on making sure our teachers are teaching the standards, assessing the standards, reporting out on the standards is not happening on a consistent basis across the school district. And until we can get 100% of our teachers being able to say this assessment test is showing progress on this standard, and I've given the student feedback, and now I've provided this intervention or I've provided this extension based on where the student's performing, we're never going to see the needle move. So we've really got to take this step to focus in on the intentionality of our teachers, focusing on the core content that is provided to us from the state, whether it's great content or not. That's what students are being measured on, and that's what's getting them accepted or not accepted into colleges. So we've got to use what we have so that we can give every student an equal footing. And until we've brought it back to that basic piece, and I can say being in classrooms and subbing in classrooms and giving, having substitute lessons where I'm like, I know this is not part of the content. Why am I wasting a day of instruction with kids on something that's not even part of the content that they're going to get assessed on? I mean, I've spent days covering classes and I'm like, this is not content. This is a fun activity. This is great, but this is not teaching the students the content that they need to master to show success. So we've got to focus in on that core, and that's why she has spent so much time really drilling into what are these calendars? How are we assessing the standards? And the other huge component with this is grading. And we're going to get into that a little bit more once Mary comes up, and I think you've got some information on that as well, is we grade on these IB rubrics at the middle school and high school level. That's where we're seeing this huge discrepancy as well on how students are progressing on the standards, because we're no longer assessing the state standards, we're assessing IB standards. Until we pull back and assess on the actual standards that the students are supposed to be responsible for, we're totally missing the target. We've closed our eyes, we've tied our hands behind our back, and we are trying to hit a target that we have and we've got spun around. We have no idea where we're headed. That's that core piece that we've got to focus on.
That's good. I think the question, though, is that does a good job of improving the curriculum so that everyone. So when we go back, and it is a discrepancy, and it does happen in Decatur, but it is happening lots of places. We're in charge of Decatur. When I look at this graph, graph 6 and 7, I'm an educator, and I see there are 16 American second graders who are beginning.
Predicted to be beginning on the end of the year GMAS assessment.
Right.
Yes.
And 6 white students, so 22. What are we doing?
Right.
Because you said something I find very non-controversial as educators, that it is much harder to catch up.
Yes.
It is like that kindergarten, and you and I have had this conversation years ago. So the most frustrating thing about Decatur is little Susie shows up and she's reading on a 5th grade level, and now you're teaching a kindergarten class, and you got the 5th grade students like, anyone have a question about that? She's like, yes, that's an onomatopoeia, and you're like, holy crap, this kid doesn't know what the letter A is. Right, and so the core does that, but it doesn't do anything for those 22 that you.
Because if the teachers, if they're not teaching the core, those students are outside getting
Totally
all
agree.
the information and all the standards, and they've got after-school tutoring from their expert, people that they're paying so much per hour. Those other students aren't getting it. So we're stuck school and intercession resources, but they're trying to make up in 4 days what this child has missed over 9 weeks.
Which is nearly impossible.
Exactly.
It's nearly impossible because it's just second, and I think you saw a chart at the beginning, that K and 1 is just as bad.
I think the important piece of
It's
the
bad.
core is right here.
That's awful,
They
right?
don't come to us
Okay.
with that discrepancy. It is something we are doing in the classroom.
In-
And let me be clear, it is not our teachers. They are doing a great job and they are trying really hard. But what are the expectations? What have we provided them as a district? And I haven't been here long enough to say, when did we move away from providing, standardized curriculum to our teachers? When did we stop providing all those things? I don't know. But I just know we need to get back to providing that. And if we look at other districts, in Georgia, yes, disproportionate outcomes exist in many places. It is a national problem, but not to the extent that it exists here.
And the other piece is continuously monitoring progress over time. And that is a huge area of deficiency in this district. Just asking principals for a monthly report on achievement was like asking people to raise the Titanic out of the bottom of the ocean. There was a lot of pushback, not just from principals, more so from teachers on why are we doing this? Why is the culture here that we've got to change? And until we can regularly monitor student progress over time based on the standards, we are able to grab those 25% of those Black students in kindergarten and say, 2 weeks into school, you need additional interventions, because we don't report progress until 6 weeks. Most of the time, that first week 6 report progress is, are you coming to school prepared?
Right. I think too, I don't want to teach to the test, right? But I think cannot overlook the need for culturally competent teachers. And because you can have a teacher who she's teaching those core things, and if she's not connecting with that student, then it's not gonna mean anything. And so, we do have the benefit of having some wonderful teachers here in CSD, but I think that there definitely are opportunities, because the pattern that I see and that I saw when I was at the middle school is that, when you come there and you're already down here, then the expectations can sometimes drop. The conversations sometimes happen in those matriculation meetings. And so, I don't think there's like one thing, like that's gonna flip this, but there has to be a multi-tiered approach to trying to close the achievement gap. And, teaching to the core, probably a part of it, but I think we still have to, bring our teachers to being at a point where they are culturally competent. And you don't have to know like everything about every culture, but just be willing to say, hey, how was the game last night? Or, things like that make all the difference.
Well, and let me be clear, that IB and EL offer, our framework offers the opportunity to teach those standards from that lens of multiple perspectives, of being international minded, of being caring and compassionate and persevering and all of those things. So those are super important, the way that we teach, because we don't want to teach, Eurocentric standards from just a Eurocentric perspective. We want to provide all of those lenses, but we do have to get back to, the core business of of teaching and learning. And we also, like you said, we have to incorporate all the things. Our students have to feel safe in the classroom. We have to incorporate social emotional learning. We have to incorporate culturally responsive teaching practices. We have to help our teachers recognize their own biases and things like that. So all of these things are important, but there also is initiatives to teach. So we have to get back to, we have to reduce the initiatives. We have to work together. We as this building have been trying our best, because they're not all different things. They're all one thing of increasing student achievement and success. And so how do we do that together so it's not seen or felt like multiple?
I think like James said, this is not a problem that's isolated to Decatur. It's a national issue, and I think, although, like I said, our numbers are fairly striking, but, we also have to go back and kind of like Maggie extended look at biases in grading, biases in, or subjective things like effort grades, and then biases in these tests. You know, like some of them is just as simple as a test you're putting in front of the child. And while that's not something you can change, it is something, like I said, that we can focus in on, because if we don't know what the problem is here, we're gonna keep spinning our wheels, and if we can't, the issue is, because we're trying to correct one thing, and that's one variable only.
And so I think because I mentioned this earlier, but what we're putting, when we're talking about the results with the students, that is a lagging indicator that's happening well after the changes that you've made. I would like to know what the leading indicator is that we need to be holding specifically you accountable for on that, right? And so you're thinking whether it's 100% of the teachers are compliant with the standards that we put out, or what, like whatever you tell us the right leading indicator is of that, I think we need to be able to see something there on that.
I mean, I know we're trying to cover so much tonight.
I'm only the first part.
I know. So we're gonna let Dr. Z continue so we can bring up, the rest of our presenters. Right, no, but I was just gonna say, Hans, I think that, when we have our, retreat on Thursday and talk about the strategic plan, it will help guide us a lot in terms of how we prioritize things. And just from our pre-planning yesterday, that became very clear to me. And so I think that, your questions are very valid, and we will, be able to address that, because these things should line up with our strategic plan.
Yep.
Well, and I think, and I may have misunderstood what you said, but, you know, typically on a school level, like real sustained change takes 3 to 5 years. And so I could, you know, hopefully we can, or not hopefully, but we're gonna do that on a district level in 5 years. So, you know, we are in really the beginning implementation stages of trying to, you know.
I guess my response to that, though, is that this is hardly the first 5-year window of time where we've said we're gonna impact this.
Right.
And we haven't. Right, and so what I definitely don't want is 5 years from now when the numbers look the same for us to be saying. So that's where, yeah.
So last is looking at these policies, programs, and procedures that we have in place. And one of those that we have been diligently working on this year is that grading piece. How are we assessing our students? And so we do have an equity and grading task force that has been meeting twice a month. It is a group of primarily teachers and some district people that are meeting. We incorporate our principals through admin council, and we incorporate our coaches' feedback in our coaches' meetings as well. But we have been reading the book Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman, and looking, kind of analyzing that in comparison to our current practices. And so we formed in the fall. We have 17 teachers representing all grade bands, diverse demographics, and experiences. The task force does meet twice a month, and has to date. We've read and discussed the book, and we have surveyed grading practices and systems from other Georgia districts. We've reviewed the Georgia rules and requirements and the IB requirements for grading. We have reviewed student feedback from listening sessions about grading from the Superintendent's Student Advisory Committee from Renfro and Decatur High School. We have held focus groups for feedback with additional teachers at each grade band, and drafted an initial big picture recommendation in regards to the grading system and platform. Gaining feedback on these recommendations from teachers, administrators, instructional coaches, and now we are currently drafting the recommendation for policies, practices, and procedures that will be finalized and shared in March for one final round of feedback from all of our teachers and administrators to finalize the recommendations for the superintendent and the board in April. So we have also expanded our opportunities for our students. Often our students with specialized programming, as we've discussed before, in Decatur Virtual Academy, we have seen some dramatic improvements in second semester that we have been very pleased with. We've been able to serve, even though it is a small group of students, there are a variety of reasons that they cannot attend school in person. We currently have 66 students enrolled. These students are a wide range of learning needs, special education, gifted, limited English proficiency. We have students that can't attend school due to physical or mental health reasons, pregnancy, family crisis, disciplinary issues, and a wide range of other individual needs. It is a very tailored program for some students that need that have some needs outside of the school building. So I'll just end with the fact that there was a recent study. It was called Breaking Down Barriers to Social Mobility, and it was conducted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and it states that the most impressive outcomes of world-class school systems is that they deliver high-quality education across the entire system so that every student benefits from excellent teaching. Achieving greater equity in education is not only a social justice imperative, but it's also a way to use resources more efficiently and effectively and increase the supply of knowledge and skills that fuel economic growth and promote social cohesion. So, not least, how we treat our most vulnerable students shows who we are as a society. So given the right resources and tools, I do firmly believe that each and every student indicator can achieve as long as all of our stakeholders are moving in all of the same direction. So that is, that's good. Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to move into discussion of the other two pillars, starting with advancing racial equity. So in terms of advancing racial equity, our overarching goal is to eliminate racial inequities across all indicators. So the things that you've already seen in terms of the academic data, as well as other things that you'll see in other reports like course completion, and we get that at the end of the year, and things of that nature. So when equity, you can see it in academic, see it in graduation rates, program participation, and post-secondary outcomes. So tonight we will review some of the work that the Equity Department has initiated to facilitate or to influence the outcomes that we want to see. So, as Dr. Banks so eloquently described at the beginning of the year report, we are focusing on 3 areas. We're looking at being able to normalize conversations about race, organize our work, and operationalize our policy. So there you see advancing racial equity and the Equity Action Plan there together, and that's just to emphasize the fact that the Equity Action Plan is actually embedded in this pillar of the District Improvement Plan. For those of you who were on the board before, you know we had a separate Equity Action Plan and report, and we still have that information to give us the subsequent years, but the current year is integrated so that we are tracking that one document. So we'll start out with normalize. And efforts in the normalized component of our work are focused on activities that emphasize cultural humility, which I'm sure you're familiar with by now. We've talked about it quite a bit, but it's the lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby an individual learns about one's own culture, the culture of others, and really examines their own beliefs. And it's really an ongoing process. It's not something that we check off and say we're culturally competent and it's done. It's an ongoing thing that we're working on. So as we reported earlier this year, over 93% of our certified staff have completed Beyond Diversity. Over this past couple of years, Beyond Diversity hasn't been offered. We've had another program offered by the same organization, Courageous Conversation, but it is a virtual Courageous experience. It's somewhat different from what you experienced for those of you who were at the 2-day training. But we've offered that 2 times this year, and we've had 78 staff members complete it. And we're constantly offering it because we have new people coming in. So we're getting those certified numbers up, and we're now working through our classified staff having them. So in terms of our district-wide racial affinity groups, we have monthly meetings of our racial affinity groups. We have white racial affinity groups, some African American or Black racial affinity groups, and some of the things that these groups are working on, in addition to our Wilson Center equity team and our district equity team, we're working on building the use of protocol. So we started off the first few years making sure we all had a common language. Well, now we are actually practicing, how do I implement this in my setting? How do I implement this with my teachers? How do I implement this with my parents, my students, whoever your stakeholders are? It's also a place where we're able to provide resources for the team's professional development and share successes and lessons learned. So you have the benefit of seeing the monthly equity reports from all of the schools. This gives us an opportunity to come together as a group and really discuss what has worked, you know, learning from one another, and being able to make sure that we are able to institutionalize some of those things that have been very positive over the years. Also, these teams submit a monthly check-in form to Dr. Banks, and this form allows our department to be able to know when additional assistance is needed and to be able to provide updates as we go along. So in terms of student anti-racism groups, we have proposed in the past that we would move forward with SOAR, that was through Courageous Conversation. So that is actually on pause at the moment. There are a few things that we mentioned at the beginning of the year that we needed to pause to be able to address some of the other gaps and initiatives that we were doing with due to COVID. So, but we do have some groups that are moving forward and even expanding. So the Asian American Pacific Islander Sidekick program is a mentorship program where students from the high school, Mary? Yep, the high school go over and they work with students at Glenwood, and so they have that connection. And then we have Young Ladies of Excellence and Gents, and we are expanding those programs, working to expand those throughout the district. So you will remember from a couple of years ago on the board, we had a proposal to have groups. Well, there are wonderful groups already started, and some of those leaders have stepped up and said, hey, we will help pull in other people and expand the programs that are already there. So we're using that funding to be able to support these groups and expansion. So as far as seat equity, the training was completed in early July for the people who would be instructors for that, facilitating seat equity. And right now, teachers have started to roll out those lessons during advisement. So next we'll jump into organize. And so here, a couple of those critical initiatives really talking about a few minutes, relevant teaching and the importance of that. I've talked with my team and with everybody on cabinet about how these are three pillars that we're presenting, but all of these things work hand in hand, be integrated. We have to have the standards and, you know, have the right content, and then the way that it's being taught is crucial. And that's the work of the Do For Culturally Responsive Education Framework. So we have had an opportunity to have the framework introduced to district leaders through the superintendent staff meeting. School-based administrators have taken a deep dive into this framework, and we've had selected schools who've said, hey, I know that we said we were going to pause on this, but we need it now. Please give us some information. And so we have started to work with other individuals to make sure that they have the information they need to begin the work with culturally responsive education. Also wanted to talk a little bit about the Suspension Prevention Task Force. It's listed here because they're our department. It also has a big influence on the culture as well. So the Suspension Prevention Committee was organized this year, and it basically brings together administrators from each school, from the district level, and the purpose of this group is to really learn about and to begin to develop some alternatives to suspension. So here, so this group meets, the whole group meets monthly, but then there are also subgroups for the schools that are working on the plan as well. And they have a charge to really look at our code of conduct and come up with SMART goals about how we will reduce disproportionate outcomes based on discipline by school, by really looking at some of those alternatives to suspension. So instead of that being sort of the go-to, having practices in place and resources ready so that you can give an instructive alternative, something that's reflective, and something that's restorative. And one of the things we've come up with is we know that administrators are very much supportive of restorative practices, and they've had the training. It's important to have tools at the ready so that when things happen, you don't have to start researching and looking for organizations to partner with to be able to have that alternative to suspension. So this is a committee that I'm really excited about because it gives our administrators and our teachers tools that they can have already ready to address any concerns that may be.
How is this suspension different from PBIS committee?
Great question. So one of the major differences is that with PBIS, we focus a lot on prevention and a lot on the structure, and 80% of the focus is on making sure you have those foundational practices in the classroom. And with this committee, we're really charged with looking at what happens when you are faced with looking at the code of conduct because something has actually taken place, and you want to be able to address whatever the issue is in a more restorative way. So it's really about finding some ways and having those tools and resources ready for when we get to that point. And it does work hand in hand with PBIS. It's interesting when you talk about all of these different task forces, many people, in many cases, the same people were focused on different goals, but some of the people who are on this team are also a part of PBIS. They bring in the PBIS team to be able to give input and to tell us what the needs are as well. So if there's something that needs to be changed in terms of a school-wide rule, and it comes out, over the course of this, there's constant communication with PBIS. So it's nothing to replace PBIS. It works hand in hand.
And they are using restorative practices, one of the ways to try to, restorative practices are embedded into the suspension prevention.
That's right. So we have a couple of texts that Dr. Banks shared with the whole committee. And in one of those, we focus on, exactly what should that alternative to suspension look like. And research suggests that if you make sure that you have at least two of these three components, you have something that is reflective. So the student might have to write a letter or might have to, learn, reflect on how this hurt somebody else and really bring in those social emotional learning skills. The student would need to do something that's restorative. So if something is broken, they can repair it, or, whatever the restorative thing is, or it may be that the restorative action is bringing together a circle, bringing together the people who are involved. So let's see, we did reflective, instructive. What's the last one, Mary? Did I say? I missed one. Okay. Reflective, instructive, and restorative. That's it.
Oh,
Okay.
that's the third one.
Yeah, that's it. So we gotta bring them back together. So all of those things go together, and so it's deeply embedded in it. But I think one of the things we found when I started working here, one of the first things I made sure we did was to have all of the counselors and administrators go through a 2-day restorative practices training. And so it's great to get that first level of training, but then you need to figure out how to put this into practice. And so the work of this committee helps to put these things into practice and into context so that people are able to readily use these alternatives as quickly as they could use suspension in school or out. I'll talk a little bit about the critical initiatives under operationalized. You've been introduced to the racial equity tool in the past and the equitable hiring tool. So all of our leaders and hiring managers have been trained on these, and we have an annual refresher on these tools every year. And the next one, the website and the equity concerns, you can access all of that information on our website. It has been completely redone. It's filled with resources, constantly updated with events related to equity. And it is the place that, one of the places that parents can go and students can go and access the form to share any concerns that they may have related to equity. And one of the things that's outlined in our plan is to look at so today we've had 10 reported, and when these are reported, those are investigated within 48 hours. There's contact made, and the investigation begins, and it may be something that is handled at the school level based on what is coming up, or it may be something that we handle because parents or students could directly contact us, and maybe they haven't contacted the school yet. So when appropriate, the school would handle those, and then if we need to manage that process here, that's something that we can do in our office.
Could I ask really quickly, how do the students know how to report that? The number 10 feels awfully low to me. I mean, and so I'm just curious, like, how do they know how to report that when it happens, and how do they feel empowered to do so?
So there have been more reports than 10 in general, not specifically about microaggressions.
Mm-hmm.
And this link to be able to report this is on every school website. It's something that school equity team members are familiar with, and they are able to share that with students as well. We get a lot of reports from staff members and from parents, more reports, I would say, from staff members and parents than students. So it may be an area that we can look at, you know, how can we amplify that? So that's something that I'll take back to my team to look at, making sure that students are familiar just based on the number of reports we get. All right, we've already talked a bit tonight about decolonizing and what that process looks like. A lot of the work that is being done around that in terms of the curriculum, you know, is being led by teaching and learning at this point. And so part of that is really encompassing the grading and the Equity and Education Task Force, and there's the Social Studies Curriculum Review Task Force that you have also already heard about. So Dr. Banks, you know, and other members from ENSS have been involved at various levels, and we support that. We work collaboratively on that.
I could ask, actually, as we're going through this on the how it's going, how are we, I know that we get each month in our packet, we get, for example, some metrics around suspensions, right, kind of broken up. I think it would be interesting to see, you know, similar things around retention, hiring percentages, and other, you know, other ways of actually measuring how we're doing on these particular metrics. And I would put this, Dr. Furman, in the same bucket as my last set of questions. What is the right sort of like overall set of things that we should be looking at to kind of track how we're doing?
Yes, we report annually to the board in the Human Resources Annual Report.
Okay. I guess that makes sense to do it annually, right?
Yes.
On a run rate basis. Okay. Do we do, I mean, are we collecting things like exit interview data, feedback, and things like that, and that all comes out of that report as well? Okay, when does that come up?
We did it last year in December, this current school year in December. The HR team, has requested to move the month when they do their annual report because it's a really busy month for them. So I think when the board, we set the calendar for when things fall on the agenda, she had some recommendations on when she wanted to present her annual report.
is there value in having something on that monthly basis that just says currently how we're doing, right? Like the percent of teachers of color in the class or whatever, I mean.
Yeah. It changes very little because of contracts.
Mhm.
So because we have people contracted for a whole year, it's very little change over the school year.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of ways to make it more top of mind than just a report once a year, is all I'm asking. So, I don't want to take a ton of time up, but that's kind of a top of mind thing.
So a lot of information from staff members about, any of concerns, even before an exit interview. Often we have a chance to get that information and intervene, so that's a part of the equity concerns, that we'll be able to work with that. And if you look in your report on pages 5 and 6, there are some of the other trainings that have been conducted, and the last one listed there is really looking at racial trauma within the district for administrators, so that as we receive information about people's experiences, in real time, we were able to discuss those, and so that administrators could address those.
Not just through that piece too, just to add to that, Lily, is then in our district equity teams, we can bring stuff like, if we're hearing about an equity issue, we could bring it up in a timely manner on our monthly meetings.
Now we're going to jump into building and sustaining a positive culture and climate. We also have our goals here by 2026. We'll eliminate disproportionate discipline based on race. That students will have a positive, trusting relationship with at least one adult in their school. And we are looking to see increased engagement and belonging on our surveys and improve mental health and well-being. So that's the work that we're doing, and you're going to hear some of the initiatives that we have put in place to influence the outcome.
Quick question, the top and the bottom, I can see exactly how we're measuring it. How do we do the second one? How do we report out that we're successful, that every student in our district has a trusted, adult?
So on that one, we have some information from the student health survey
Okay.
that gets at that question. So right now, it's once a year that we'll be able to capture that. And we'll be looking at ways.
And every student takes that, or that's a sampling of students?
Every student grades 3 through 12.
Through 12, and they answer this question, okay, great.
Yeah, there actually is a specific question
Yep,
in your hand.
okay, good enough.
We have 2 measures.
How are we right now?
We didn't give the health survey last year, so this is the first year we'll be giving the health survey.
Okay.
And I've got to look at what, we did tripod last year, but not district-wide. I don't have that number off the top of my head. It wasn't bad.
Okay.
Actually, happy with what it was.
And the tripod survey will be administered next week, so we will soon
We'll
have
know
data.
after that.
Mhm. So these are the areas that we'll be talking about in terms of looking at our multi-layered social, emotional, and behavioral support. And I wanted to start off with this framework because all of our mental health are implemented through multi-tiered systems of support. So you hear that a lot. You hear about what we do at Tier 1 for all students and what we do for students who need a little more intense intervention for Tier 2, and then those who really may need some individualized attention and intervention at Tier 3. That applies to all of the work that we do under this pillar and through our mental health services and support. So all right, so in terms of the district improvement plan, this year we are collecting baseline data. So we talked a little bit about the tripod administration that'll happen this week, and it's grades 3 through 12. We'll do the student and teacher versions this year. There's a parent version, but the same information survey, so that's how we will get that information this year. In terms of restorative practices training, we've completed one restorative practice training this fall, and We have multiple trainers in the district now, so one of the first goals was to get our own people trained so that they could provide this, and so they're available upon request. Any school can reach out and say, hey, can you work with my third grade team? And we can have the trainer go out and do that. And we also have been called to do some restorative practices circles for different staff members or in certain circumstances at schools. So there are school-based people who are trained, and then if there's a case where it would be helpful to have an outside person come in, then we can do that as well.
You said one sort of practice training completed. Is that the only one that's required?
There's a 2-day, which is like the training that most people who are going to actually be working with students need to attend. And that 2-day training covers, you know, just how circles work and information about. We have done this training for the past 3 years, but because of attrition, you know, sometimes we need to offer that again. So we want to make sure that at all times, every administrator and counselor has had that training. So we offered one in the fall, and we're preparing to offer at least one more this year at the district level. But refreshers are needed. And the great thing about having internal people trained is that they can actually do a 30-minute or 40-minute refresher at a staff meeting. And so at Decatur High School, they have their own plan of how they're working with teachers right now because they have a trainer there. So more trainings are definitely needed. One and done won't do it all with restorative practices. So we have that formal aspect of it, the 2-day, but then there are many other ways that people can access, in addition to some of the information that's coming through the suspension prevention task force as well. So, step back to this one for a minute. So when I was talking about years 2 and 3, I wanted to highlight a few things that we've done that are different because of COVID-19. So because of COVID, we've talked a lot about the increased needs for mental health support. So in addition to, you know, all of the things that you see here and other things that you'll hear that talk about this evening, we have contracted some additional therapists when the needs arise, and we see that, you know, more students need support. So we're not just seeing a referral and saying, oh, you know, we're at capacity or we have a waiting list. We've actively sought to make sure that we're doing that. We have an additional social worker who's providing tier 2 and tier 3 support due to sort of that increased demand that we're seeing as well. We have contract psychologists that work with us because due to COVID, we had a time period where we couldn't conduct assessments and do some of the work that we typically do at tier 3. And so we have been addressing that through having contract psychologists. We're evaluating this year, you know, what support is needed. We were sort of looking at, well, this first year, and then, okay, now we have the second year into COVID, and we're trying to see where those supports and needs actually are as we move through this phase of the pandemic.
You say what CSMH was?
We did. Behind the slide.
Can you give me an example of the targeted social skill instruction? SEL.
Okay, so in terms of social skills instruction, if you have a group of students that maybe have one area that they need to work on in terms of their, I don't know, whether it's empathy, whether it's whatever specific area is coming up, if you have a small group, then we could pull out a small group of 3 or 4 students and have lessons that are, you know, that either the counselor or another individual would provide. So at tier 1, it might be all in their morning meeting that you're addressing, you know, the different areas of character development and things that we want students to focus on. But if you see you've got this one little group and the same behaviors are coming up, then it's time to pull those kids together and have something that's focused for them to talk through and practice and, you know, have some more time with that skill.
Okay, so then it takes something that might be on the SEL curriculum, either whatever, and then level 2, a strategic someone in the building or a counselor or whatever, see
I'll talk a little bit about PBIS. So, we were talking at the beginning of the year about how this is a little bit of a reboot, because we've been implementing the PBIS matrices virtually, but it's a different story when you come back into the building. So I'm excited to say that all of the schools have been able to relaunch their PBIS work successfully. We had TFI walkthroughs, tiered fidelity inventory walkthroughs, where you're looking at, hey, do I see the expected behaviors posted? Do we have positive acknowledgements are happening, you know, and how are people using data? And so we had our state school climate representative and our behavior specialist go to all the schools and walk through and interview and see whether or not, see how we are progressing. And so we had some really positive feedback with that. And we had people who are, our schools are implementing these components. There are maybe one or two areas where, you know, we put the rules up in the cafeteria, a few other little things, that feedback that we received from the state on that. But we are moving in the right direction with PBIS. And we're operational before emerging.
Or operational.
I can't remember.
I should know that.
Out of order.
Yeah. They have a new status that they came up with this year because of COVID. So like even before these two.
Okay.
Because everybody's sort of backing up a little bit and, you know, reteaching all of the behavioral expectations. So I talked about MTSS being our overall framework. We also have some specific goals related to the MTSS process when it comes to behavior. In the past, you know, there have been some elements that we needed to include, and some of those are things like having a behavioral screener for students. We talked about the dyslexia screener. Well, we need the component that would address social, emotional, and behavioral sort of mental health for all students. So we formed another task force, and with the same people. And so what we have done this year is really look at, you know, where are those missing pieces that we need to plug in to really shore up our behavioral support. And one of those was the screener. We have vetted a number of screeners and selected one, and we are planning to implement that next year. So we're in that phase of getting everything ready to launch that for next year. It's also a time to come together and to talk about what's going on with students and to consult across groups. So we have members from teachers, teaching and learning, state and federal programs, and equity and student support, and we meet twice a month to go through all of those cases that are coming up that we want to make sure that we're all consulting, because behavior and academics can go close, you know, hand in hand. We have to make sure that we're addressing all of those needs. We're also looking at needs assessment and resource mapping. So those are two of the things that the committee is doing as well. And that's really just looking at not only what do we have in the school district or need in the school district, but what's going on in the community. What other resources do we need to pull together to support our students? So the next time we meet, we'll be able to show you, hey, this is the plan that we have to fill any gaps. This is what we already have. So that's in progress. So C, learning. I think you've heard quite a bit about that over the last couple of years. C, learning has continued, and we are doing implementation in K-5 right now. All of the K-5 instructional staff were trained, administrators, all of our counselors have been trained, and so we are moving forward. They have aligned some of the work of C learning with what takes place in the morning meetings, and we're integrating that right now. And for 612, we're looking at how to embed those elements of C learning into the curriculum. In order to really have a robust social emotional learning program, we have to continue to find ways to embed it in the other work that's happening so that we don't have yet another initiative that we're asking teachers to implement. So we're collecting data as we go through with the help of Emory University, and so by the next meeting, we should have a little view about we are with C learning. So now we'll jump into comprehensive school mental health outcomes. And now I've got my two experts in the room here, so if I get off track, let me know. They're going to be here for the discussion if you have any questions at all, but just in terms of a high-level overview, I'm just really excited about the work that our counselors have been doing. Our counselors have really been working very hard on really getting this model and the standards from the American School Counseling Association. If you look in your report, you will see a list this long of the different aspects that they've already been trained on. And all of these things really help us with those outcomes like attendance, course completion. They influence behavior. They influence all of those indicators that will let us know if we are having those equitable outcomes for all students. Diane and Dr. Jones as well, really working with the counselors there. And so, again, part of that process is looking at what we have already and what we need. And so that's what we mean by the needs assessment and really being able to set program goals based on the data that we're seeing. So what are the student needs, and then being able to plan around that. So also another thing that I want to just make sure I highlight is that just want to give kudos to Dr. Furman and for our team really looking at moving forward with getting that ASCA ratio of 1 to 250 in terms of counselors. And it may be a large number, seem like a large number, but there are very few places in the state where you see that. And we're doing some great work around that as well as with the Decatur Student Center. And right now, if you look at our allocation for counselors, we get funding from the state for 9.67. And with moving to this 1 to 250, we'll be over 20 mental health professionals across the district. Very exciting.
If I could ask a couple questions here, because I think this gets to a bunch of the questions that I had. I think the first one is just is the 1 to 250, we just arrived at that ratio because it was the recommended ratio from the American Association of, I forget exactly what it is.
It's extensive research, national research, and they found that, for a school counselor to be effective, that they need this caseload. I mean,
Yep.
if you'd like to make it 1 to 50, you go, because I'll be happy.
Well, so this is my precise question. I guess it seems reasonable to ask that coming out of the pandemic, I think this was one of the questions that came up in the last meeting. A parent had called in about this. But coming out of the pandemic, so we have historically been, 1 to 500, I think, students? So there's probably an overhang or a backlog.
It was probably higher than that. But
yeah. And so there's that. So historically, there's been a little bit of a backlog. And then coming out of the pandemic, where presumably there's a much greater demand for some of these services, how do we know 250 is enough? Is there an assessment to decide whether actually we have a backlog and we have a little bit of time that we might need 1 to 50 feels pretty aggressive, but right? I guess I just want to make sure that we're methodical and thoughtful about it. But if the kids need it, and I think we heard pretty clearly in that last presentation that the kids feel that they do need it, what is the right number, right, beyond just that ratio?
Sure, yeah. So the thing about the work that we're doing with ASCA is that it in itself is multi-tiered, right? So, and the reality is we need to work aggressively to get into a prevention mode so that our students have the resilience and the self-regulation skills to be able to master, because we do know as adults that, we're going to hit conflict in life. So by doing this data-driven program that we're doing, we are making sure that all students get this tier 1. Those are our classroom lessons that we're doing. Then we go into those tier 2. Those are the skill-based groups that we're talking about, where they're learning executive functioning, self-regulation, and resilience. And then we do have our school counselors doing individual counseling with students as well. Where we're really fortunate is we have this other layer of the Decatur Student Center. And I'm thankful, when I came here, it really never get to a point where we don't need intervention. We're getting more on the prevention part by making it a pre-K through 12 program. So I feel like we can meet the needs, particularly if we get those ratios lower at every single school. And not only that, but if we do it with the fidelity that we should, and really using the counselor keys evaluation, and counselors held to that, and administrators held to, utilizing counselors in a way that we are uniquely trained in the building. And so, you know, and that's some of the discussion that we're having as well. I really think it's more about making counselors, giving counselors the ability to do this unique work rather than the number itself.
Sure, and
Plus,
so.
we have these other resources and contracted and other things and therapists on staff that nobody else has.
Yep, and so I guess that if we are fully comfortable that 250 is the right number, then I'm not gonna go out and lie myself or anything. I do want to put it out there to say that if there is a short-term surge or a need for temporary additional staff or a need to help us get over the hump that we've been dealing with in COVID, I think now is the time to be talking about it and making the ask, right? Because I think that is something that we would look at evaluating as a priority. One of the things that you brought up that I did want to ask, when you said that the counselors kind of are uniquely skilled within the schools, like how does that, is it like the nursing program, or is it like the principal oversees the counselor? How does that work exactly? How does that rubric work in terms of who the counselors are responsible to?
Right, the principals evaluate the school counselor.
Are they qualified to? I guess it's.
I've done some training. I specifically brought people in to do training with our principals around this, because the evaluation tool that we use is the one that is recommended now by the DOE. To be honest, that was a long time coming. It only got revamped, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. And that was the first time since the 90s, which we did our work completely differently.
Yep.
And to be honest, the Georgia School Counselor Association did a survey, and we found out there were counselors in other parts of the state that were being evaluated on the same tool as the bus drivers and the custodians.
Yep.
So we at least have a tool that represents and reflects the specific work that we can do, we're trained to do, we should be doing. And it is all based on the standards put out by our national association, which are heavily evidence-based.
Okay.
I think that's the key too, is moving forward with this, data-based, or data decision, model that Diane is implementing across the district is huge.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was a principal and she started training the counselors in Gwinnett on this, I saw just a huge improvement in my whole counseling program just based on the work that they were doing and as they were implementing. And then the training for the evaluation gave me the skills as the principal to say, hey, here's, seeing this, I'm looking at your data that you're presenting, I see you're meeting with this many students, you're spending this much time on this. I'm able to see that growth with the counselors on an individual basis.
Okay. Then just a couple other questions. I had several paragraphs about this, so I'm sorry, I'm just gonna stick on it for a second. I think the other one, we talked about expanding, the high school student center, which is now really K-12, still physically located at the high school. Where are we, I wanted to talk a little bit about ensuring that there was a plan, or that we were, how that was gonna happen at the middle school as well. I mean, I hear about counselors having to walk around the building to have private space with the students that they need to talk to and things of that nature. I just wanna make sure that isn't something that that is something that we intend to address and make sure that we're gonna have resolved.
You will.
All the people, all of the counselors have an office.
Yes.
Right, but was the conversation about the student center, the location of the student center, their space, but I guess there's not much privacy, having to walk down the hallway, is that what that's?
I think it was more about students the younger students not feeling comfortable having to get into the 8th grade hallway more so than it was about them having to be seen going to and from the student center.
Okay.
That was my understanding. And
I
then,
would also be if there are students that are in there, right, because they're welcome to go in there as they should be. If there are already students that are in there, and I'm a student that's in crisis that walks in,
yeah.
and I see 8 of my peers in there, probably not gonna stay to have a conversation with the counselor that's in there at that. It's separate, you know what I'm saying? And so I think the need to be able to get separate safe makes an awful lot of intuitive sense to me.
Yeah, and we've identified a classroom that's gonna be the student center for next year. Diane and I have kind of talked about what needs to be in that classroom so that we can move forward on the planning for that.
Okay, and we'll see that as a part of this budget, obviously, if we're having to authorize funding for that.
We actually, we can use funding for the most.
I just wanted to clarify, let's say a student was not comfortable going to the student center, they can still go to their grade level counselor.
Correct.
Because the student center is just an additional layer of support outside of their grade level counselor.
Right, and
So
there's
under
one
what
referral, I'm sorry, I was just gonna say that there's one referral form, and, you know, the counselors are able to have access to that and decide based on the student's need who would be the best person to address it. So they can go to their counselor, you know, but they're working hand in hand. Completely separate.
The main difference is the level of, service, because even if the school counselor and we do have several school counselors that are licensed professional counselors, that's not their role in the school. And so they can do some counseling, but if someone needs true therapeutic trauma type work, then that's more of the student center. So the next level, and that's where most places they don't have any.
I was wondering, under what circumstances would a student go to the student support center versus their grade level?
Yeah, and even if they're seeing a student-centered therapist, they can still go to their school counselor for it.
Does I forget the acronym, I had it pulled up here, the publication, the ASCA standards, does that deal with that trauma-related counseling as well, or is it more like career path counseling, and then there's a handoff to?
Right, no, it's actually, we have, all of the ASCA stuff is trauma-informed, and really we're more into the trauma healing, focus of it, and the three main areas is school counselors look at social, emotional, academic development, as well as post-secondary planning, and whatever that is, whatever that looks like, and then, of course, you know, the therapists are working more on the therapy.
Great, so I'll start with, well, let's see here, crisis prevention and intervention programming. So, we talked a little bit at the beginning of the year about how, we are expanding our training on applied suicide intervention skills training, or ASSIST. We have our own local trainers who are now, doing this work, and I had a chance to participate in the training, the last training that took place, 2-day training. And, I'm a licensed psychologist, but I got more in that 2 days than, you know, a whole semester of classes, because there was so much usable information that you can take and immediately be ready to implement. And I think the vision that was shared with you a little earlier is just about making sure that we have multiple community members. Yes, the school, but also local therapists, first responders, you know, moving into making sure that everyone is able to do this work, because it is the work of the community.
And I would like to extend an invitation to all of you. We only have one more scheduled this year, and I realize March is probably short notice, but we will let you know when the next dates are, for next school year. We would love to invite you to come and participate. It is, as Lily can tell you, an extremely intensive training, but it is probably one of the practical.
So that, I mean, actually does raise a point, I always, not that I'm trying to suggest particular frameworks, but the way that we hand off to the community, or the community hands off, right, because it is, at the end of the day, the schools aren't, say, you know, meant to be able to provide full-scale services, across the board, right? And at some point, we do have to hand off to community professionals. And how do we engage there? Like, what is that, do we have specific folks in the community that we do work with? Like, how does that mechanism work, you know, helping the child through whatever crisis they have?
Right, so if you go through ASSIST, the goal of ASSIST is to help you to identify the students in crisis, and then also to help them to decide to be safe for now. And that is not, that particular program is not intended for clinicians. It is actually intended to raise awareness and to create a suicide safer community. And so we have invited community members, we've worked with like CEF, we actually put it out on our social medias, inviting people. Many of the local, therapy groups that our students see, most often. And we're doing this at no charge, thanks to, the grants that we've gotten. And so, we are really trying to increase that. I've been about even reaching out to PTAs, reaching out to, local community civic organizations, and going and doing this like a 40-minute overview that you can do. But then having a solid referral process. And one of the really, as Dr. Holton said, one of the really important pieces to us is that we include our fire and police. Because a lot of times they're the ones showing up, and a student may, or any member of the community may appear to be having one type of crisis when this is really the type of crisis. They might have a gun in their hand or a knife in their hand, but it's really about hurting themselves, not other people. And so having these other skills, instead of shocking somebody, having skills to say, let's talk about why we want to pray. And that's what we look for. There's very specific training where we're looking for turning points and things like that, and reasons to lend hope.
I wanted to add that one of the things that we were doing with the slide about resource mapping was to make sure that we keep a valid list of our community providers for referral and things of that nature. So we have people, obviously we have like the mobile crisis unit, we have, multiple other groups that help in situations that are beyond the scope of the work of the school district. And so part of the work that the social workers, counselors, all of these folks are doing is to make sure that we are able to make contact with these agencies. So when we need them, we know where they are and we can refer people. And we have multiple sources, because with mental health supports, you need to be able to consider, are people able to put that on their insurance? Who's able to help people who need to use Medicaid, all of these kinds of things. So that's part of the work that the team is doing this year, is collecting those resources, and those things have to be constantly updated.
Yep.
It's important for us to be that resource to families, to have all of these great resources within the district, but knowing that we couldn't possibly address everything.
Are there frameworks you guys are evaluating or using?
So I think at the beginning of the year, we talked to you a little bit about our National Safe Supportive Schools coalition work that we've been doing. It's a 2-year program where we are able to access some of the leaders in the work of school mental health, and they have a framework that they provided, and so we've been working through elements of that and getting information from them on some key things that we want to consider and have in every element of our resources, our assessment, and things of that nature. So that is really the framework that we are working with. It's multi-tiered, so it's the same one that I did.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
All right, so last bullet. So in terms of prevention, we talked a little bit about assist. Also want to talk about sexual harassment prevention. There's a curriculum that counselors have been implementing called Think First, Stay Safe, and this is where we're focusing on preventing children basically being exploited or lured, things of that nature, into all kinds of unsafe situations. And so that has been implemented, moving forward. It's been implemented in elementary schools, middle schools are working on it now. And also, the Decatur Student Center has 2 groups that are taking place at Renfro that I wanted to highlight, and they're highlighted in your packet. Really excited about this work. One of them is Empower Her. And the purpose of this group is to bring together female-identified students so that they can have some of that trauma-informed, healing-centered treatment related to experiences of sexual harassment, really focusing on self-advocacy and focusing on giving them skills related to communication and boundary setting and things of that nature. And similar topics are being addressed with male students as well. So there's a new group forming, and Fanta High has just done some amazing work around this. And it gives students a chance to be able to talk about these things. And from that, we're able to glean, what are the things that on a district level we need to be thinking about in terms of our practices and policies and any additional training that students need.
quick question.
Sure,
Do any of your wraparound services, include, counselors or social workers who are skilled in substance abuse? And if so, where would that fall? Because I agree with what she was saying, that, you know, the physical space and the number of counselors matters, but so does getting the right person with the right skill set in front of the right child. So, but that's something that sometimes we forget about, is substance abuse.
That is another area of expertise of Fanta, and she has been doing a lot of work around that, and in fact, in terms of an alternative to punitive discipline, been offering her groups or her support for counseling for students who have issues around.
Does she need a team? I realize I just had a conversation about reducing the budget, but I mean, this is something that I think is unbelievably.
It is so important.
Right, and so,
Yeah. So I was mentioning earlier that over the course of this year, we've been monitoring what that looks like. If there gets to be a waiting list, you know, we have been adding services and supports, and, you know, we've been trying to steal a little bit more of Fonda's time. She's half time, but she's been willing to work some additional hours for us in this area. So I am constantly monitoring, you know, the referrals and to see when we need more.
So I guess the one takeaway that I would want to try to convey, again, as one of the board members, but I am willing and open to a conversation about more investment here if you decide that's what's necessary. I think this is an area where, I don't think you.
And that's where, you know, as Lily's talked about several times, resource mapping and needs assessment, so that we can say, as we move forward, what are the needs? Do we need to bring Fonda on full time? Do we need to add another social worker? So those are the things that she's been looking at and kind of gauging this year. So we've been contracting with some additional services. Is that sufficient, or do we need to bring on people?
And that'll be a part of this budget conversation at some, okay, all right.
What? Question on a couple of points. First off, I really appreciate the bump that occurred, you know, leading into COVID. I think that's the end of the conversation last week in the Vox report, being kind of bust that for the last people. It's actually shocking at the state level, the number of counselors that are represented. I looked at a similar Vox report. I mean, they're not paid enough, and you know, that visit to the students. The correct answer to Han's question of like, what's the proper ratio? Obviously more. That's one big caveat. Second is, I was actually shocked by the report that we got, that there wasn't actually much like, there's no one available to meet with me. It was very content driven from the middle. It was a lot of like, they only want to talk to me about time management, or the teachers don't recognize that mental health is part of my day, only the counselors do. You know, there was little stuff like that, and it got me to thinking, like, two parts. One, how do we, like, add to the curriculum as it arises? Like, something that we would have never talked about when our age group was, like, cyberbullying. And that's, like, all over the news. It's all a part of Decatur. It's all a part of what we do, and then being proper online and being a part of yourself. And that's why I kind of asked my question about, like, targeted social interaction is the way you had it phrasing. Like, how do we do that? And I would love to see sort of the lower elementary counselors, as part of your projection, it was like cut back on those. Maybe use those people who our K-2 people already have relationships with for that like targeted education. That like tier 1 level of intervention. I'm like, here's a little more mature topic than our K-2 stuff. I would love to have more people. I really do. But I think we actually have a content-based feedback that's been provided for us. It's like the teachers need to incorporate some of the mental health stuff. And there's some subjects that we're not getting.
Yeah, that's part of where, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lily.
I was just going to say that some of the topics that you brought up are a part of the Think First curriculum. So it's embedded in that, and that's what the counselors are doing. Another component for the teachers will be through the Safe Supportive Schools grant that we've had, going this year and will continue next year. So we'll be able to provide some of that trauma healing center, terms change, healing center training for teachers so that they can recognize, when a child is having harm. And that's also part of the C learning, and the fact that we wanted to make sure we're expanding that to all of the teachers. We're putting a lot in the teacher wheelhouse, but the teachers are also the ones that are with the kids all day. So we want them to have as many tools as they can to be able to say, hey, this is going on, and be able to point them in the right direction.
So how do we add to that curriculum to make sure that we're hitting stuff, and how do we give students a space to add to that curriculum? That's from a policy perspective. And then two, how do we make sure resources are going in the right place? So far more than like, let's hire a bunch more counselors, which may be, obviously that would be the solution. Like if there was one counselor sitting in every classroom, done, like, great, but that's probably not feasible. Like, how do we make sure that the resources the problem year to year, so identify the problems. How are we assessing strides we're making?
So again, there's two pieces. One is to meet with the data-driven comprehensive program. Our school counselors, more so than they ever have before, are looking at data, and that is not only their own. We're looking obviously at outcome data. We're always looking at how are we going to improve attendance or behavior or academics, right? That's the outcome. Okay. And then we work back from there. So even things like attendance, right? With the idea that if I can work with a social worker and we improve attendance, that actually improves more access to the curriculum and to the skilled teacher, and therefore we will have better outcomes. And then they track it, and as part of our programming, we actually are required to do a classroom unit and also to do a small group. And, we're always assessing pieces of the program, and then seeing, is that effective? Like, so if I have a 6-week group with kids, I do a pre and a post with them, and then I actually am looking to see how can I improve it? Not well, I didn't get 100% of the kids. It's not about 100%. Yeah. It's about improving it and moving the needle. Okay. And so, can I pause there on units? Can you list a couple of those? Right, so for example, Think for a State Safe, actually this year, RMS, they were doing something before and it was not as, I felt like it was really important. Again, I'm very big on building common language. Yeah. And so we've been doing Think for a State Safe now for 3 or 4 years in our K through 5. And so now we're expanding it. And what happens is it builds on the previous language and concepts, but in a more developmentally appropriate way. So they're actually looking at also the learning previously, what did the kids retain from elementary school? And then they're going into specific topics, cyberbullying being one of them. And so they, as many, and then as we get up into high school, we even go into dating relationships and boundary setting and sexual harassment and sexual assault and things that are appropriate. And eventually we'll expand it to 12th grade. We're required by law to go through 9, and we're covering that, K through 9. And we have plans to expand it out over the next couple of years. So that's an example of a unit. It could also be executive functioning. I know Jackson is doing a targeted classroom lessons, a series of 3 that is looking at stress, anxiety, test-taking skills, time management skills, organizational skills that he's doing. So he's doing a pre and post on that to see, where he might be working with individuals.
Do the units, you're assessing that, attendance.
Attendance, behavior, and academic outcomes are what we're looking for. And part of those outcomes, can even be looking at, are we, I've had counselors that have worked on reaching out specifically to students of color to make sure that they are entering advanced placement classes. And then with that, making sure that they give them the extra support that they need to have, do you know where to go for tutoring? Do you know, how how to make flashcards, how to do whatever it is that the kids are identifying as barriers to them. And then, they're looking to see how many of them take this down, what score do they make on that exam. And they're using tools like, SAT has a, success predictor, for kids, but making sure we take that list and operationalize it and get out there and have those conversations.
It strikes me that we're talking about an entire sort of cultural fluency about this topic that has to be driven out of it's not just your organization that should be fluent at this. Every principal, every teacher, everyone across the system. And I do think that some of the work that we've done around equity is a good model, right? Where you raise it, you're gonna get resistance from people, but you have to continue to hammer it and then provide the training and resources for everyone to understand what we're talking about, not just a couple of proselytizers that feel like they're, out there trying to do the job without support. And so that, James, what you raised, where the students are not necessarily access, sometimes it's all of the other, it doesn't get prioritized by a teacher, they don't feel like it's valued or prioritized within their peer groups, for example, that it's important for us to try to resource against.
I'm curious, just along the lines of what you're both saying, and going back to the content comment, what type of conversations we're having or the teachers are having for their mental health. I think if we're looking at it from a standpoint of you have a teacher in the classroom and we're looking for kind of a strong mental health proponent for the classroom, so then back to the kid that says all they want to do is talk about time management, but if the teacher knows this is actually for all of us to take a moment and, not just one student that may need it, but the whole class needs it. So do we have things in place that are also specific to teachers being able to implement those kind of things for their entire class? Because, we've learned also from a couple meetings ago that our teachers are overwhelmed. They've also been through COVID just like our students have. And so what type of things are we doing to maybe make it feel more inclusive that we're talking to everybody about their mental health?
We absolutely have tiered supports that work with teachers and teachers as models. So when we look at the C learning work, all of those resourcing techniques, all of those things, teachers are learning those and they're modeling those and they're using those. And they're normalizing conversations about your feelings and what's coming up and building those skills around resiliency. So that would be like the tier 1 level. So all of our K-5 teachers have been putting that in place this semester. Then if you think about the next level, we've had a number of principals reach out and say, look, my staff is struggling, we need some additional help here. And Diane has sent some folks over, to do some. Then sometimes we've had people say, hey, can you give me a referral for an individual staff? And that's where our EAP, our Employee Assistance Program, comes in, and we can give people specific resources within the community of folks they can reach out to be able to get support. And I think it just helps that we're talking about this just across the board and making it where people feel comfortable to even ask.
Learning training, and it was just started recognizing some of anxiety-inducing things in my own, and I would be like, okay, I've got a resource, some resourcing here. So it's been really helpful.
That's what either of you can answer. Do counselors meet together district-wide, the way like math, curriculum, and instructional? And she said something about like PTAs and reaching out like that. Is that structure in place for mental health stuff? Like, hey, this might be something we'd like to bring to the PTAs available.
I know that we've engaged with PTAs that, as I've so much in the mental health support, but I do think that as we look moving forward on how do we enhance mental health supports for our students, that we've got to start making some expansions to how are we engaging parents so they know at home, how do I help support my child? Or how do I, as a parent,
cookies, or as a parent, or I'm not gonna buy them alcohol for their weekend party. So those are kind of the things that I think are the next steps for us as a school district, taking it, approaching it as the community, but involving the parents. The parents need to know that will be providing an environment in their home that's supportive for mental health of their children. That in some of the other elements of our third pillar, like CBIS, we have plans for work that we can do with parents around CBIS. In a previous position, I used to do trainings for parents. I want to bring that to the district as well. And we are already providing some individualized support, because sometimes parents say, hey, I don't know how to manage this behavior at home. Our behavior specialist has gone out and worked with parents and provided individual consultation sessions on various things that are coming up with behavioral health, social emotional development, and that kind of stuff. All across the years, we have started that work, and there are definitely some ways that we can expand it. But it's definitely front of mind, because students need to have that consistency. If you're thinking about really improving behavior and social emotional development, they need to have that.
I think they use the analogy of this being a hard ship you're trying to turn quickly. You can't do it really, really quickly. But this is an issue where the pandemic has put this in front of mind of all of our kids and all of the parents. And so anything that you can do to get that into the community and to bring some of those forward, and if you need to make requests for resources, I think this is something that I'd be willing to prioritize without question.
I just want to thank Dr. Huddleston and Dr. Beam and their team for this presentation. And I just want to, help the board see that we have been doing a lot of work as a school system, that the pieces are moving. It does take time to shift the big ship. We are making moves that are cultural shifts for our staff, for our school system, and it takes time to put those things into place. And not only have they been doing this and going above and working extended hours, but they've been doing this in the midst of a pandemic. So they have been working above and beyond the call of duty, doing all of this and providing the additional supports that our staff have needed during the pandemic. So I just want to really give a huge shout out to both of their teams. They've been going above and beyond and just doing amazing work. And, as we talk about going forward in the budget, and when we present the budget, knowing that if we want to see these things strategically moving forward, it takes people at central office to move them forward, or it has to fall on teachers in the schools, principals at the schools. So there is a need for people at central office to do this work to move these things forward. And I think it's also really to have this kind of massive overview of our main three pillars as we move into the strategic planning process on Thursday and start talking about what that looks like for the board. Because I know that we are all hungry as an admin to have some really solid strategic direction, foundational pieces from the board, so that we can take this and move it to the next level. So I thank you all for your time tonight and your active engagement and your questions, and look forward to our session on Thursday.
The meeting was adjourned at 8:33.